Hello, I'm Clark Ritchie, CTO and co-founder of FactGem. This morning, I'm going to give you a sneak peek at our upcoming release, Prospector. Prospector is a graph analytics pipeline that allows you to perform complex link analysis to your data on the fly. This pipeline can be applied directly on top of your existing relational data sources or files. And best of all, you can apply these complex link analytics without having to write any code. So now you can leverage all of your existing infrastructure, including data sources, BI and reporting tools, while still getting the power of link analytics. Let's go ahead and head to the demo now and see how it works. Let's go ahead and log in to get started. This is WhiteBorder. This is where it all begins. The idea behind WhiteBorder is to allow you to create a visual model of your data just as if you were drawing on your whiteboard. So here's a model I pre-populated using the classic Northwind database. As you can see, all of your nodes get properties and different data types as well. Relationships are created simply by drawing lines between two nodes and then naming the relationship. Additionally, properties can be identified on the relationship to serve as identity. This is how the system knows if information coming in is new or if it's about something that already exists. So let's start creating a pipeline. I want to create a pipeline to do some basic analytics around customer orders. So I'll name the pipeline accordingly. The first thing we do is add a data source or data mapping to this pipeline. I'll go ahead and connect directly to my Northwind database. You can import a credential if you already have one, or in the case as I'm showing here, we can go ahead and create a brand new data source credential. Here, I provide the information for connecting to the MySQL server running on my local computer. Once the credentials have been provided, we verify the connection and provide you with an overview of the schema for the database. You can scroll through it to find information that you're interested in, or you can go ahead and search by table name. I know in this case I'm interested in the orders table, and I'll select a few of the columns here. You can also see not only what type of data the column holds, but if that information is a primary or a foreign key. You can also grab some information from the customers table. And after having selected that, I'll go ahead and click on the select button, and we'll move on to the next step. At this point, we're going to connect to the database. After we select these join clauses, here you see they're automatically pre-populated based on the foreign and private, based on primary and foreign key information, but you could change this if you needed to. We've now gone ahead and pulled information from that database as a sample and auto map that into that model we created earlier. Here we're just confirming those auto mappings. The order date does need a date transformation, so we'll go ahead and apply that. We give you the ability to apply a variety of different transformations, including prepending, appending, mapping, and of course in this case, date formatting. So I'll enter the date format here. If you're unsure, you can always go ahead and use the help and get a full list of all of the possible different date formats. And in the preview pane on the right, you can see that was applied appropriately. I'll save this date mapping, call it customers and orders. And now that I've saved it, validation happens automatically. Here the system essentially pretends to load the data, tells you what would have happened if it had actually loaded it. This is an important step to make sure that what you think you're doing is actually what's happening. So now that I'm done, that brings us back to the creation of our pipeline. We have that data mapping. We identify the source or the credentials we're going to use with it. And we can add more data sources here if we want to data mappings. But now we're actually going to add an analyzer. This is now the step that happens after all the data has been gathered, in this case from our Northwind database. We're going to perform analysis. This could be a simple analysis, such as we'll demonstrate here, or it could be a much more complex chain of analyses that are strung together for more complex results. You see we provide a variety of out-of-the-box analyses, and these will be added on in the future. So create our first job. This is going to be a simple query where we're going to just look for some information coming out of that Northwind database. So here I'm just going to paste in a query that I've already created. That's going to grab all of the customers that have made orders, and we're going to aggregate up that customer's ID to the number of orders they've created. So you can see that I saved that. And again, we could add other analyzers here. But in this case, I'm happy with that. So I'm going to create a delivery process. Every pipeline just has, as it has to pull data, must deliver it somewhere. So in this case, we're going to deliver it right back to our Northwind database in a table that I've created specifically to hold reporting parameters. This is really important because we're allowing you to write that information directly back to a relational source so that you can use all of your existing relational tools and expertise. So maybe if you have Tableau or some other reporting tool or BI tool that works with relational database, you can just go ahead and use that. So here we see we have our delivery job, our analyzer job, all in the pipeline, and I've activated the pipeline. Important thing to note, notice we didn't write any SQL here. We just dragged and dropped to create our model, dragged and dropped to identify the data that we want pulled in, and just told us the system where to write the data on the way back out, and all of the SQL just happens for us automatically. So it'll take a moment, but then once this goes ahead and loads, we will see the status of this pipeline change from empty and with the analyzer change from pending to delivered. So now you can see that the pipeline has been delivered. So we can pop over to our MySQL workbench, take a peek at this table, and see that the information is there. So there we go. Right back into our Northwind database, into our new table, we can see all of those. Additionally, if we peek at the database itself, we can see something interesting. The order information, if we look and see how many of those, you'll see that those are all gone. The pipeline automatically cleans up after itself, truly performing the analysis in flight and not retaining the data. In this particular case, customer is the exception to that, because we said when we created the model that customers should be persistent and therefore not cleaned up because they may be used later on. So that was a brief demo of our upcoming prospector tool that'll be released shortly. I also have a talk just following this in the main auditorium about the business value of being a data-centric enterprise. So hopefully you'll join me there as well. Additionally, I'll be at our vendor booth throughout this conference. So if you have more questions or want to just stop by and chat, please feel free to do so. I'm hoping you enjoyed your demo of Prospector, the first link analysis pipeline tool that provides complex link analysis on the fly on top of your existing data sources. Stay tuned for the main launch, and I hope to talk to you again soon. Hello. Welcome to the business value of data-centric thinking. Excuse me. I'm your presenter, Clark Ritchie. So we'll just start off briefly. I'll give you just the tiniest bit of background about myself. And I will say, well, I've done a number of conferences across my career and even some virtual. This is my first time where I can't actually see the audience in any way. So this is a new experience for me, doing this without any feedback. But we'll see how it goes. So I spent over 20 years building really large systems, mostly in the space of the US government and Department of Defense sectors. So as you can imagine, that's given me access to some really interesting and challenging problems in terms of big data. Prior to co-founding FactJet, the company where I am currently acting as the CTO, I was the director of public sector sales engineering at a good-sized database company called MarkLogic, headquartered out of Silicon Valley. So that's just a little bit about my background and sort of where I'm coming from in terms of my take on this. So on the next slide, I was originally asked to give this talk, and I thought a lot about it. Why are we giving a talk in 2021 about the business value of data-centric thinking? Because it seemed to me like, well, everyone's probably doing this, right? Everyone is engaging in some way or another in data-centric decisions and thinking and moving their enterprise, their business in that direction. So I did a little research to better understand the context, and of course, there's a lot of fluffy sort of concepts around this, right? Data centricity, data driven. What do those things really mean? But one stat that really struck home for me is highlighted on that next slide. And that, of course, is that, and this is derived from a 2017 Forbes study. The link is here for you. So it's fairly recent, but only 45% of senior executives were including data or data analytics when making decisions. 45%. I'm hoping it's gone up a bit since 2017, but I'm not sure it's changed that dramatically. Um, as I think back in a lot of conversations I've had with senior executives in various industries, um, it hasn't really changed that much, I don't think. So this was really eye-opening for me, and so yeah, this is an important talk because we're not really there yet as an enterprise, as a community. We still have work to do here. So that's what kind of really excited me about this talk. So on the next slide, I just want to sort of set the stage again about where I'm going to go with this. Um, what I'm not going to try to do is tell you how to run your business. I don't know your business. I don't know you. I can't even see you. I might be here all by myself. Um, but obviously, data centricity, like any other complex or even interesting topic in business, is not a one size fits all approach. There are, I think, general concepts and ideas that are worthwhile and valuable um, that can be applied to a lot of different scenarios, but not necessarily to all. Data centricity may not be where your business needs to go, or it may need to go there in a slightly different way based upon your specific needs. And I think that's perfectly appropriate. So uh, that being said, let's go ahead and on the next slide and jump into um, some of the base concepts. I think it's important before we talk about data centricity um, to talk about being data driven. And I say this because, and we'll talk about this a little more in the upcoming slides, but organizations, enterprises typically don't just start out being data centric, right? It's a journey to get there. It's a progression. Um, and typically where people start out with that is in this concept of being data driven. So what do we mean by that? Um, well, data driven, in terms of rough concepts, um, really is just what it sounds like. Uh, it's about changing your culture to value the utility of data in making those business decisions. So it's getting your people within your organization to really understand that as we make a lot of these crucial business decisions, we need to have good data to support our hypotheses, to test them after we've made the decision to see if the outcome we've reached is appropriate, if it matches what we thought we would see. Um, it's really a cultural change first and foremost. And once the culture changes, you can start to implement technology changes, right? And I think this is I think that pattern is something we are seeing throughout any major technology change. You have to adopt a cultural change, an attitude change, a change in your beliefs, and then you can change your technology. So what happens when you do that? Well, one of the major things is this fosters tool development. So if you're going to decide to drive business decisions based on data, well, then you need good tools to collect the data, to persist the data, and of course, to perform analytics on the data, and then display the results of those analytics in some way. That's a dashboard-centric BI tool, some kind of report, charts, or even just columns of numbers, whatever it might be. We've got to get those results out. And of course, one of the side effects of that is you end up with lots of applications potentially, and lots of applications can lead to having many views of your data. So we're going to explore this a little bit more with the help of the picture on the next slide. So here's just a notional uh, uh, data-driven enterprise, right? So very simply drawn here. We may have decided we need 3 different applications. Could be in typically in various different business units. So one could be in HR, one could be in purchasing. Doesn't really matter. But what happens is some unit of the organization has a problem, decides that, well, we're data driven. We're going to collect data, analyze the data to make good decisions and to track our progress. So they go and they figure out where's the data. These days, it's very often in this big data lake, right? Not always. It might be in data warehouses, smaller databases. Doesn't really matter in terms of being data driven. This is just a notional scenario that is fairly typical. And what you'll see across all 3 of these is while they all may be drawing from the same data lake or the same data warehouse, they're developing slightly different models of the data. And that makes sense, right? If you think about it, and I like to use retail as an example when giving out talks, not because I expect that everyone here is in the retail sector, but because I think most people as consumers have a fairly basic understanding of retail. So something we can all kind of relate to. So if application 1 might be used by your vice president of uh, sales for a particular product line to understand what customers are buying your product and how sales are going and so forth. Um, and so, of course, the models there are going to be created based upon that representation. They're going to be focused around customers and transactions and a little bit of product. Well, application 2 might be looking at your supply chain. How do you get products how do you get products acquired into the warehouse, potentially built or sourced from other locations? How do you ship them out to stores? Where do things need to go? So you're going to be pulling from that same corporate data lake potentially, but you have a very, very different model. And this model is going to be much more centered around the product and inventory and shipping and things. And the information about that product that's in this supply chain application is very likely going to look different than what's in the application focused on sales. And this, again, is very, very typical. So you'll get answers from different questions. There's going to be shared data, but everyone is thinking about the data in their own way, applying their own beliefs on top of it to drive those tools to get the answers to the business questions that they need. And this is very normal way to do things. So let's talk next about what value that may bring on the next slide. There are definitely benefits to being data driven, and I'm not going to spend excessive amount of time. This talk is trying to get us to being data centric. But obviously, we're going to try to make decisions based on data, not on our feelings, and that typically is a good thing, right? Even if we're wrong, we can collect that data, hopefully learn from it, maybe see what happened, why things didn't work the way we thought, learn from it, and move from there. So this being able to test our theories and with results and learn from them is really, really important. And you can, of course, start to standardize your data and automate certain practices. So things that you may have had to do by hand in the past or that were one-off processes, you can now start to automate because you have this tool set based upon your data. So that's typically a good thing. So let's look at the challenges. Well, one of the main challenges is data is very often duplicated. right? So when we saw that data lake in the middle before, and we saw these applications pulling models out, well, that's true, but it's also often simplistic. The picture was very high level. Those models do get extracted essentially for a particular tool, but that tool then tends to store a subset of that data in the data lake so the tool itself can use it. The tool doesn't typically talk to the data lake directly. It may, but very often you're extracting a subset into a data mart perhaps and using that. So now you have lots of smaller data marts, databases, etc., uh, coming back into existence in addition to your more centralized warehouses or data lakes. And that can lead to a lot of challenges. Uh, you've got a duplication of resources, not just in the data itself, but in terms of the costs required to maintain the hardware, the powered cooling if you're hosting your own, the, the hosting costs, and certainly the manpower to maintain all the different data stores and those tools. That can be very expensive. You can very often you will see IT shops that are very internally stressed with lots of different demands, and even data sources that are very difficult to get data from now because the demand being placed on them by different organizational units has become so high. One of the things you can also see is sort of these data empires cropping up. And what I mean by that is this is back to a cultural challenge that we get. You'll often see that when an organization puts in a lot of effort to create this specialized model around a business problem, pull the data, um, transform it, cleanse it, massage it into the right shape, and then apply some value to it. Other adjacent organizations may want some of that information for their tool, and you can often hit friction between these two. Ideally, they would just share the information, the data, the model, but often you can get um, sort of internalized resource fighting, as I'm sure many of you have seen, around who controls this data, uh, why should I give you the data, etc. Um, and of course, it makes it very difficult to create any kind of IT standards and things around this. So let's move past data driven now and start talking about, um, actually, first, let me give some more specific examples. Um, so places you may see this concretely, back in retail. Again, I see this all the time. You'll see retailers that have the same product. So maybe they're selling you the same pen or the same coat, whatever it might be, in a physical store as well as online. And yet they end up with a massive problem because very often the SKU, that internal number for it, is completely different based upon whether that item is sold online versus in the store. And that tends to be a result of these data silos cropping up internally. Someone created a tool to track in-store sales and manage that and profitability. And then someone else created a different tool when the online sector became important. And they're tracking it differently, pulling different data. And now you're creating these problems. And then once that's happened, reconciling them can be a nightmare. Cross-functional reporting can also be very challenging. You'll very often see this when gathering financial information. I've seen this in very large medical systems where a CFO, even of the entire organization, will ask a simple question like, how much business are we doing with a particular hospital? This is a medical supplier. And that can take, I've seen that take weeks and weeks because all the different business units have defined customers and the supply chain and so forth a little bit differently and built different tools at the corporate center. And gathering all of that information together into one place becomes extremely challenging and can take a very long time. And then even reconciling that information, uh, it doesn't always match up to say what the core financial systems are saying. So I've seen situations where those systems individually might say we did X amount of total business, and then the main corporate finances that are run by accounting says, well, that doesn't match at all. And again, that becomes extremely difficult to reconcile. And then it goes to the IT every new project tends to want a new data mart, a new data warehouse, because they don't want to deal with that main corporate data lake or data warehouse. So now we'll actually move on to data centricity on the slide. So I talked a bit about being data driven. Again, it's typically the first step. What is data centric? Well, once again, it's primarily a cultural change, and it's a different way of looking. In data centric, we said we're going to use data, and then of course tools we build on the data to help make decisions about how to run our business. Now we're saying the data is really the most important thing about the business, right? So, like, one way to think about this, you think about Google. You say, "Oh, what is Google originally?" You thought, "Oh, Google's a search engine company." They would tell you, "No, they're a data company." Same thing with Facebook. What are they about? They're a data company. They're not about a social media platform. That's just how they gather our data. Their data is the most important thing, and that's a big cultural change. Applications tend to become transient, meaning that you'll have a business problem, and because businesses, of course, change and the business landscape changes, you'll create an application to solve that. But you're going to evolve and probably move beyond that, and that application may very well go away because it's the data that's important and what you do with it, not so much the tool itself. The number one way to get there, or one of the most important aspects of getting to this data-centric approach, is to create a shared model. This is really important. And it's also important to understand that this model is going to be evolving. It's not something we're going to create once. It's not a static model, but it's an evolving model that applies a holistic view of our enterprise, of our organization, our business. And this is really super important. It can be challenging to do for sure, but is really the key piece in understanding data centricity. So let's explore that a bit more in the next slide. Here's a notional view of a data-centric enterprise. So here you'll again see we have multiple different applications. We have a data lake and an enterprise data warehouse, just like we had before. The difference in this somewhat, I will admit, crudely presented picture is that I've got this really large shared model that goes across all of those applications. So we're all using the same shared model when we create or deploy any kind of a new tool in the enterprise, regardless of where the actual source data might physically live in the data lake, in enterprise data warehouse, whichever. And that's really a different and important new way of looking at things compared to being data centric. So let's go and explore why that's really critical in the next slide. Yes, it's a shared model. So why do we want to do this? Why do we want to take this time to create this evolving, holistic, corporate view, really, of the data? Really, the most important reason, in my belief, is fostering understanding across the enterprise. Fostering understanding. Any organization of size, and really size is probably, more than 4 or 5 people. If you're not all working on the exact same thing, as soon as you have some kind of data or job differentiation in the company, and you're working on different aspects of things, you're big enough for understanding to be an issue. And if we don't all understand the data that drives our business, if we don't understand what we're talking about when we have conversations about that data, we're going to hit a lot of roadblocks in every aspect of our decision making and our organizational structure. And it leads us, the shared model leads to what I like to call a more honest model. What do I really mean by that? It's more honest in that we're looking at the totality of the business as best we all understand it at the moment, and are agreeing on those shared concepts, those shared structures that drive our business. If I go the other way, where we're data driven and I'm creating my own models with an application, I'm going to be looking at the data through the lens of my very specific business problem that I'm building this application to solve. And that, of course, is going to lead me as a human being to apply my biases, my beliefs that exist because I'm an expert in this particular business problem. I'm going to apply